Hello family, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please subscribe and drop a like for us. This generosity would go a long way for us. Also share to family and friends. And please turn on post notification to stay tuned for more. Thank you as you do so. Now let's get into the story. When the rooster crowed that morning, the town of Olode stirred to life as usual, but Naomi's heart felt like a drum being beaten from the inside. The same market women who gossiped near the village were already tying their wrappers, their laughter echoing across the narrow red soil paths. Life to them was a familiar circle, birth, struggle, and burial, but to Naomi it had become a straight, winding road with no visible end. Her son, Timmy, slept curled beside her on the raffia mat, unaware of the storm that brewed beneath her ribs. The child had not known ease since the day fate snatched his father without knocking. Naomi had learned to wear pain like a second skin. She scrubbed strangers' laundry under the hot sun, hands wrinkled like overused fabric, dreaming of nothing but a roof that wouldn't leak and a plate with more than crumbs. Every time she looked at Timmy, she saw the ghost of his father in those almond-shaped eyes that asked questions she couldn't answer. The day before, she had received word. A cousin, long forgotten like an old photograph, had called her from a place she couldn't even pronounce at first, Valandria. Housework. Good pay. They'll process your papers, the voice had said through the crackling line. The promise hung in her heart like an unripe fruit, bitter, but full of hope. She hadn't told anyone yet, not even Mama Rachel, who had raised 10 children and buried 3. Decisions like this weren't for the village to debate. They were carried alone like a clay pot on the head, balanced with tears and resolve. The sun had barely risen when Naomi sat on the edge of the bamboo bed, her fingers tangled in the threadbare wrapper she wore like armor. Outside, goats bleated, carts creaked, and the scent of burnt firewood wafted into the room through the holes in the mud walls. She turned to her sleeping son, whose tiny limbs sprawled without a care in the world. His breath was steady, his chest rising like waves on a calm sea. Naomi swallowed hard. The world was cruel to children without protection. She had seen it herself, how orphans grew tough skins and thinner hearts, how they began to wear silence like a scarf and never asked for more than what they were handed. That was not the life she wanted for Timmy. But she also knew that love alone couldn't fill a belly or pay school fees. Sometimes love had to walk away, just to return with something in its hands. Her mind returned to the call. Valandria. A foreign land, cold and clean, where she could trade her sweat for money instead of insults. It sounded too good, but the voice on the phone had been firm. You'll be all right, cousin. You're strong. Strong. Yes, she was. She had survived childbirth alone, survived the burial of her husband with a face that didn't crack, and endured the sneers of neighbors who said, "A fine widow like her? She'll remarry in no time." But Naomi didn't want a man. She wanted meaning. She wanted something that would make Timmy proud one day. Something that said, "My mother didn't sit and wait for fate to feed us scraps. She fought for it." Later that afternoon, Naomi stood under the mango tree in front of her mother's compound, watching the wind play with the leaves. The compound was quiet, except for the clucking of chickens and the rhythmic thud of a pestle pounding yam in a neighbor's kitchen. Mama Rachel sat on her stool, her back bent like an old branch, chewing bitter cola with her eyes half closed. Naomi cleared her throat, and the old woman looked up. "Mama," she began, her voice as soft as cooked yam, "I want to talk to you." She explained it all, Valandria, the job, the cousin, the travel. She expected resistance, but Mama only nodded slowly, spitting out the cola peel. "The wind does not ask the tree before it blows. If your spirit says go, then go. We will take care of the boy. Ruth and Michael are here. You know I'm old, but I still have my eyes." Naomi nodded, though her throat felt tight. She turned to Ruth, her younger sister, who was plaiting her own hair with a mirror balanced on her lap. "He's your nephew. I trust you." Ruth didn't say much, just smiled and shrugged. "He'll be fine, Naomi. Just bring us something nice when you come back." That night, as Naomi braided Timmy's hair by lantern light, she told him gently, "Mama's going far. But I'll come back. You'll stay with Grandma and Auntie. Be good, my boy." Timmy looked at her, puzzled, but smiled anyway. "Bring me biscuits," he whispered. Her heart cracked quietly. The journey began before the birds stirred the sky. Naomi carried her box like a woman carrying both hope and grief in equal measure. At the motor park, she held Timmy tightly, breathing in the scent of his skin one last time, as though to bottle it in memory. The boy held onto her wrapper, looking around at the buses and strangers with wide eyes. She kissed his forehead and whispered promises she wasn't sure how to keep. The bus jerked forward, and as it drove away, she saw him chasing it for a few steps, barefoot and confused, before Mama Rachel pulled him back. Naomi didn't cry. Her tears had learned discipline. She arrived in the city and passed through layers of noise, papers, queues, and questions until she boarded the flight. Valandria was a distant song, and she was following its melody. When she landed, the air was colder, the sky grayer, and the people moved fast like clockwork. Her cousin met her with a forced smile, and took her to a small room in a building that smelled like bleach. "It's not much," she said, "but it's a start." That night, Naomi sat on the bed, looking at the single photograph of Timmy tucked in her Bible. "I'm coming back," she whispered to it. "I don't care how long it takes. I'll return with my hands full." In that quiet, foreign room, a mother's fire burned quietly, far from home, but never far from her child. The air in Valandria was sharp and unsmiling, like a place not used to softness. Naomi had arrived carrying nothing but hope stitched together with necessity. The first few days were a blur of silence and adjustment, her body dragged through unfamiliar rhythms. Early morning cold baths, fast-paced buses, rules printed on doors in languages she couldn't speak. The woman who brought her in, Cousin Edna, had little warmth to offer. She was a woman who had long forgotten the smell of firewood, or the sound of frogs singing after rain. "You'll be fine," she said, more out of obligation than kindness. Naomi was handed over to a family who lived in a tall apartment that smelled of perfume and canned soup. The walls were white, and the silence buzzed like electricity. Her job was to clean, wash, and cook meals she didn't understand. She smiled when spoken to, nodded even when she didn't know what was said. At night, she lay on a thin mattress in a storeroom, clutching the photograph of her son, whispering his name like a lullaby. Back home, she imagined, Timmy would be brushing his teeth with charcoal, asking if she had sent biscuits yet. The ache grew like moss on stone, slow but certain. Still she worked. Days blurred into weeks. The family she worked for rarely spoke to her directly, as though her presence was furniture, not flesh. Naomi endured it all with a kind of quiet dignity, like a tree in dry season, bare but still rooted. Back in Olod, the world kept spinning, but time didn't flow the same way it did in Valandria. There it was slower, and in the absence of Naomi, silence filled the gaps in her son's life like water fills a cracked bowl. Timmy had stopped asking when his mother would return. At first, he counted the days on his fingers, asking Mama Rachel questions that felt like tiny arrows. "Why is Mama not calling today? Did the airplane swallow her? Does she still remember me?" But as days grew into moons and months folded into each other, the questions stopped coming. He hawked boiled groundnuts after school with a tray bigger than his shoulders, his legs turning shades darker from the sun. Ruth, always seated near the back of the compound, would often call out, "Don't forget to sell everything before dusk." No one watched if he ate. If he cried, the wind was his only companion. But when Naomi called, the tone changed. "He's doing fine," they'd say with cheerful voices soaked in lies. "He's even growing taller. We got him new slippers last week." The words always came dressed in smiles, but Naomi noticed things in their silence too, like how Timmy never spoke on the calls anymore, or how they never answered when she asked what he ate for lunch. She tried not to overthink it. Maybe the boy was just shy. Maybe the network was bad. She repeated the lies to herself until they began to sound like truth. Every month, without fail, she sent money. Sometimes more than she could afford. If she had to skip dinner so her son could eat chicken back home, so be it. She would swallow hunger like water. Naomi found a routine that hardened her like bread left out too long. She swept the marble floors with quiet excellence, her body moving through tasks like a machine with no soul. In Valandria, no one looked into your eyes unless they needed something. The children she cleaned up after barely knew her name. But every time she received her monthly pay, she'd break into a private smile. This meant food for Timmy, notebooks for school, new sandals to replace the ones she imagined must be wearing out. She sent voice notes, never too long, always cheerful. "Timmy, Mama loves you. Listen to Grandma. Eat well. I'll come back soon." She had created a calendar on her wall, drawing small circles for every month she completed. 12 months in, the wall bore her hope in faded blue ink. Then came a strange shift, one she couldn't place immediately. Calls were ignored more often. Replies to her messages took days. She would ask how Timmy was, and someone would say, "He's around." But the boy never came on the line. One day she asked for a photo, just to see how much he had grown. They promised to send it. A week passed. Then two. Nothing came. Naomi began waking at night, heart pounding, feeling as if she had forgotten something vital, like a mother's instinct screaming through oceans. But every time she picked up the phone to demand clarity, she heard her own voice say, "Don't cause trouble. They're family. They'll never harm him." The day Sandra's call came was as ordinary as any other. Naomi had just returned from the supermarket, her hands heavy with groceries she couldn't afford for herself. She planned to boil beans that night, maybe fry plantain if she could stretch the oil. Her phone buzzed with a number she hadn't saved, and her first instinct was to ignore it. But something told her to answer. Sandra's voice came through the speaker, sounding like it had swallowed glass. "Naomi, please. I've been thinking about this for days. I didn't know if I should tell you. I saw Timmy." Naomi stood still. He was hawking groundnuts on Oak Street. Barefoot. He looked so thin, Naomi. I wasn't sure it was him until I asked. He told me his name. Naomi's mind froze like someone had pressed pause on her breath. Sandra continued, now sobbing. "I took a picture. I didn't want to, but you need to see it." A photo arrived seconds later. Naomi opened it with hands that trembled like dry leaves in the wind. There he was, her son, her Timmy. Dust on his feet. Shirt too small. Tray pressed against his forehead like a burden he was too young to bear. Her world spun. The floor seemed to vanish beneath her. She dropped the groceries without knowing it, beans scattering across the tiles. Her chest burned. She couldn't speak. She sat on the floor, phone clutched to her chest. That night, she didn't sleep. She stared at the photo until the sun came up. Then she rose and began to pack. Not a single call was made. Not to Edna. Not to her employers. Not to home. She was going back. And this time, not even God himself could stop her. The road that carried Naomi back to Olod was long, bending through hills and valleys as if fate itself wanted to test her patience one more time. Her thoughts galloped like frightened goats in a storm, chasing one another without direction. She didn't sleep on the journey. She didn't speak either. Her eyes remained fixed on the cracked windows of the bus, watching the towns blur past as the vehicle groaned through miles of red soil and broken tar. The picture of Timmy burned in her mind like a fire that wouldn't die. Her throat ached with silence, and her stomach, empty for hours, made no protest. It had given up on comfort. She had traveled through cold and foreign streets in Valandria with the promise of better days lighting her path like a lantern in the dark. And now, here she was, returning not with joy, but with a rage so quiet it made her bones tremble. The woman seated beside her in the bus asked once if she was all right, but Naomi didn't answer. What could she say? That her trust had been trampled like cassava leaves under market feet? That the people she called family had turned her child into a roadside statue? Her palms clenched on her lap. She didn't even know what she would say to them when she arrived. She only knew that she had to see her son, look into his eyes and confirm with her own spirit what that picture had already screamed. The first breath Naomi took in Olod felt heavier than it should have. The town hadn't changed much. The same leaning electric poles, the same barbershop with its rusted zinc roof, the same smell of burnt oil and palm wine that floated through the morning breeze. But everything felt different now because she was different. The Naomi who left had been full of hope, her hands tied with promises. The one returning had come with nothing but questions and a sharp ache in her chest. She moved through the dusty road like a shadow, unnoticed by the townspeople who bustled past her with baskets and buckets, lost in their morning business. Her feet carried her without her permission. Her eyes scanned every corner, every tree, every boy she saw hawking by the roadside. Her heart pounded as she approached the junction Sandra had mentioned in the call. She didn't need a guide. Her body moved like it remembered something her mind didn't want to see. Then she saw him, a small figure by the corner of the road, balancing a tray that looked like it might crush him. His shirt clung to him with the shame of sweat and old dust. His eyes wandered, not with curiosity, but with the tiredness of someone who had been forgotten. Naomi's knees weakened. That was her son, her Timmy. The world could have collapsed right then, and she wouldn't have noticed. She stood there frozen, while he adjusted the tray on his head and began walking, not knowing his mother had just seen him for the first time in nearly 2 years. She didn't call his name. Not immediately. Her legs began moving before she realized it. She followed him at a distance, heart in her mouth, watching as he approached compound gates, knocking softly, offering small sachets of groundnuts with the politeness of someone who had been trained not to speak too loudly. He looked much older than his years, not in size, but in his demeanor. There was something dim in his eyes, something missing. Naomi wanted to run to him, to lift him, to erase every scar the world had drawn on his skin, but her feet refused to move faster. When he stopped under a mango tree to rest, she finally approached. "Timmy," she called softly, her voice barely more than a breath. He turned around slowly, eyes blinking against the sun, squinting at her like someone recognizing a ghost. "Mama." The way he said it made something inside her break, and she crouched down, opening her arms without speaking. He stared a second longer before dropping the tray and running into her embrace. He fit into her chest like he had never left, as if the past months of neglect had not carved distance between them. Naomi held him, not minding the dust on his clothes or the sweat on his back. Tears ran freely down her cheeks, but her mouth said nothing. This was not the time for words. It was the moment for holding, for breathing in the scent of her child, for feeling his ribs and knowing just how much weight he had lost. When they finally pulled apart, he looked up at her face and touched her cheek, as if confirming she was real. "You came back," he whispered. Naomi smiled through the tears. "I never left you, Timmy. I only went to gather something better. But now I am here, and I'm not going anywhere again." He nodded slowly, the way children do when they want to believe. Naomi picked up the tray he had dropped and carried it in one hand, his tiny fingers wrapped around her other. They walked in silence toward the family house, the road ahead long, but no longer lonely. When she entered the compound, no one noticed at first. Ruth was seated outside plaiting her hair, a mirror in one hand and chewing stick in the other. Mama Rachel sat near the door, pounding bitter leaf in a mortar with slow, tired arms. It was Michael who saw her first, standing with Timmy, holding the tray, her face unreadable. "Naomi," he said, voice uncertain. All heads turned. Ruth stood quickly, the mirror falling from her hand. Mama Rachel dropped the pestle mid-pound. Naomi didn't shout. She didn't ask questions. She simply walked past them all and entered the house with her son. Silence followed her like a long shadow. Once inside, she sat on the bamboo bed and took off Timmy's slippers. His toes were blistered, the skin rough from walking miles. She examined his ankles, his arms, the small wound on his knee. When she looked up, Ruth was standing by the door, fidgeting. "We didn't expect you," she said softly. Naomi raised her head and spoke for the first time since arriving. "I know. That's why I came." The house felt colder than Naomi remembered. The walls seemed to shrink inward, as though they too were ashamed of what had happened within them. Dust clung to corners, as if the home had been waiting for someone to finally come and see the truth hidden behind the silence. Timmy sat beside her on the bamboo bed, swinging his legs, still unsure if he was dreaming. Naomi wiped the sweat from his forehead gently with the edge of her wrapper, and every second of her absence crashed down like waves against her chest. She should have never trusted anyone with him, not even those who shared her blood. Her fingers moved over his skin like a mother tracing a map of wounds she hadn't been present to prevent. Outside, she heard the soft shuffle of slippers and the nervous whispers of people trying to explain what could no longer be defended. Ruth's voice came first, carefully stitched with hesitation. "Naomi, we didn't mean for things to go like this." Naomi didn't turn her head. She focused on her son's fingernails, chipped and blackened. "When did he start hawking?" she asked without raising her voice. There was no answer. The silence outside deepened, heavy and choking. "I was sending money," Naomi continued, this time her tone carrying more weight. "Every single month. Sometimes extra. And all you had to do was make sure he was fed, clean, and safe. That was all." The door creaked slightly as someone shifted. No one dared to enter. It was the quiet shame of those who had been caught red-handed, yet still hadn't found the words to beg for forgiveness. It was Mama Rachel who finally stepped inside, her walking stick tapping the ground in slow, tired rhythms. Her face, once round with age and wisdom, looked drawn, as though the truth had stolen color from her cheeks. She stood for a moment near the doorway, her eyes scanning the room, resting briefly on Timmy before settling on Naomi. "I won't defend myself," she said at last, her voice low but steady. "The child should not have suffered. I failed." Naomi looked up at her mother, searching for any flicker of remorse or recognition in her eyes. "You were the one person I thought would protect him. When I left, I believed he was in safe hands. But he's thinner than he was when I left. His back has marks. His feet are hard like stone." The boy glanced up at her, then at his grandmother, confused by the tension between the women who had raised him. Mama Rachel lowered herself onto the stool by the window, sighing long and deep. "Things were hard," she said finally. "Ruth stopped helping. Michael was always out. Sometimes food didn't come easy. We managed how we could. Naomi stood then, walking across the room, her back straight like a reed in a storm. Did you eat every day, Mama? The question hung like smoke in the air. Her mother didn't answer. Because I did not, Naomi continued. I went hungry, so you wouldn't have to stretch. I worked in a house where I was invisible. I endured insult, cold, and long hours. I sent money even when I had none left to eat with. So tell me again, Mama. How did my son end up in the street? Outside, a child's laughter broke the silence, unaware of the storm brewing inside. Naomi didn't wait for more explanations. Her heart had already closed its ears to excuses. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the compound, the neighbors began to gather slowly, the way moths gather around a flame they know might burn them. Word of Naomi's return had spread like fire on dry leaves. Some came out of curiosity, others out of guilt or shame, and a few to simply witness the fallout of a family's cracked foundation. Ruth stood outside the doorway, eyes swollen from what looked like recent tears, her hands gripping the hem of her blouse. Michael leaned against the veranda pillar, chewing the inside of his cheek like a boy who had been scolded. Naomi stepped out with Timmy, who now held her hand tightly, his grip firm like he feared she might disappear again. No one dared speak first. The weight of unspoken truths hung like ripe mangoes, ready to fall and bruise everything. It was Ruth who finally broke the silence, her voice small, almost childish. Naomi, we didn't spend everything. Some of the money, we kept aside. We meant to give it to you when you returned. Naomi tilted her head, her eyes narrowed. You want me to thank you for saving what you stole? Ruth took a step back. We thought we were helping, she said, barely above a whisper. Naomi laughed then, not from humor but from something deeper, something bitter. If this is your idea of help, I pray you never help anyone again. The tension in the compound thickened, but Naomi remained composed. She was not there to scream. She had no voice left for war. Her decision had already been made. She had come for her son, and that mission had been accomplished. Everything else was dust in the wind. She packed her things the next morning, a quiet dawn lit by resolve. There wasn't much to take, some clothes, a few books she had left behind, and a locket containing Timmy's baby hair, which she found still tucked under the broken pillow in her old room. As she folded the last wrapper into the nylon bag, Timmy walked in and sat beside her. Are we going far again? He asked, his voice timid. She paused for a moment before answering. We're not going far. Just somewhere different. Somewhere peaceful. He didn't ask more. He simply nodded and leaned against her side. By mid-morning, she stepped into the compound one final time, her bag in one hand, her son in the other. Mama Rachel watched from a distance, saying nothing. The neighbors, unsure of how to say goodbye to a woman they had all failed, kept their heads low. Ruth approached again, her steps unsteady. Can we write to you? Naomi looked at her with tired eyes. You can. Whether I answer is another matter. Then she turned and walked down the road, her slippers slapping softly against the earth. Timmy kept looking back every few steps, but Naomi never did. With every footstep, the weight on her chest lifted just a little more. And though her hands were not filled with riches, they were not empty either. They held her son. And that, after all the smoke had cleared, was more than enough. The road away from Olod felt like a path cut through two worlds, one behind Naomi, heavy with betrayal and silence, and the other ahead, uncertain but full of quiet promise. The sun was only just climbing above the horizon, and the early morning chill clung to their skin as mother and son walked hand in hand toward the main junction. Naomi didn't say much. Words still trembled on her tongue like ripened fruit she refused to pluck. Beside her, Timmy walked without complaint, eyes half-lidded with sleep but footsteps steady. They had slept little the night before, huddled on the bamboo bed as if trying to make up for all the years of distance. Naomi had kept her eyes open, not because of fear, but because of thought. She watched the boy's face, memorizing its changes, mourning every moment she had lost and every birthday she hadn't sung for him. Her thoughts turned to the quiet ache that had grown into a storm inside her since the photo Sandra had sent. She recalled how long she had trusted lies served with sugar. It made her angry, yes, but more than anything, it made her feel foolish. And that was a feeling she never wanted to know again. They reached the roadside, and Naomi flagged down an old, dented bus heading toward Ibana. It wasn't a grand move, not the sort of fresh start she had once dreamed of. But at least it was a beginning, and this time she would build it brick by brick with her own hands. By the time the bus dropped them off in Ibana, the sun had climbed high, pouring its warmth over the red roofs and clay walls of the town like a blessing. Naomi held tightly to the bag slung over her shoulder, guiding Timmy along the narrow paths between houses where stray chickens pecked at the ground and women washed clothes in metal basins. She had only visited Ibana once before, years ago when she came to sell yam with her aunt during a market day. Now it was to be home, at least for now. She moved with purpose, asking for directions to a room she had heard was available for rent behind a provisions shop. The landlord, a wiry man with a crooked smile, inspected her with the suspicious eye of someone who had been crossed too many times by tenants who vanished before rent was due. Naomi introduced herself respectfully, explained her situation without sharing too much, and offered to pay 2 months in advance. The man, sensing honesty in her voice, or perhaps just tempted by the advance, handed over a rusted key. The room was small, one narrow window, a rough cement floor, and the faint smell of kerosene, but it was theirs. Timmy stepped inside and looked around, turning his head slowly like someone expecting the walls to speak. Naomi laid her hand on his shoulder. "We'll make it better," she said softly. "Not perfect, but better." He nodded once, then found a corner to sit. Naomi exhaled deeply. For the first time in what felt like years, she was in a space she controlled, free from the shadows of broken promises. The first week in Ibana moved slowly, like a song sung without instruments. Naomi went from shop to shop, asking about cleaning work, laundry, even food hawking if need be. She wasn't picky. She just needed a way to earn, to start again. Most people gave her the same answer. "Come back tomorrow." But one afternoon, the owner of a small roadside eatery gave her a chance. The woman, known in the town as Madame Fola, was short, round, and suspicious of everyone, but after watching Naomi sweep the front of the shop without being asked, she said, "If you sweep like that, maybe you can wash pots too." Naomi didn't argue. She thanked her, rolled up her sleeves, and worked as if her life depended on it, because it did. Every night, she returned home to find Timmy curled up with a borrowed textbook or humming songs to himself. The boy had stopped asking why things had happened the way they did. He had accepted the change with a quiet wisdom far older than his age. Naomi enrolled him in the local school with the little she had left, convincing the headmaster to let her pay in parts. On Timmy's first day, she followed him halfway before he turned and said, "Mama, I can go alone." She watched him walk the rest of the way, his shoulders straighter than they had been in Olod, his pace more certain. In that moment, Naomi felt something shift inside her. Not joy exactly, but a small flame of peace, fragile, yet warm. It was during the second month in Ibana that Naomi began to truly breathe again. The routine, though difficult, gave her a rhythm to hold on to. She rose before the cocks crowed, packed food for Timmy, and walked to the eatery where she scrubbed, chopped, and stirred from morning till dusk. Madame Fola, hard as she was, began to soften ever so slightly. She let Naomi take home leftovers sometimes, and once even gave her a used pair of sandals for Timmy. Naomi didn't ask for much, but every kindness felt like water on dry land. Timmy, on the other hand, blossomed quietly. He made friends at school, brought home drawings of trees and birds, and started to talk more during dinner. He told her about a boy who liked to chase goats, about a girl who sang louder than everyone during morning assembly, and about a teacher who gave him extra pencils. Naomi listened with her eyes and her heart, nodding, smiling, storing every detail. She found herself laughing again, real laughter, not the polite kind. Some nights, after Timmy had gone to sleep, she would sit outside on the front step, staring up at the sky, whispering thanks to no one in particular. She didn't have much, but she had enough. And for the first time in years, her soul wasn't hungry. The rains came earlier than expected that year in Ibana, washing the red earth and leaving the scent of renewal in its wake. The streets turned into slow-moving rivers, and children laughed barefoot in the puddles like they were playing with joy itself. Naomi stood by the door of the eatery, watching the water trace long paths down the uneven pavement, her thoughts elsewhere. It had been 5 months since she and Timmy had left Olod, but it felt like another life entirely. The sharp edges of her memories had dulled slightly, though not completely. Sometimes, when she woke too early, she still saw him, Timmy with that tray on his head, shoulders bent beneath the weight of what no child should ever carry. She had tucked the photo away in a locked drawer, not because she wanted to forget, but because she no longer needed to stare at it to feel its power. Her life now had movement, and movement was its own kind of healing. Timmy was doing better in school than she'd hoped. He no longer looked over his shoulder or flinched at sudden sounds. His smile came quicker, his voice louder. She found herself humming again while cooking, catching the notes without realizing it. The people of Ibana had come to know her not just as the quiet woman with the hard-working hands, but as a woman who had survived something. They didn't ask questions, and Naomi never offered answers, but they respected the way she carried herself, with grace pressed into her spine like folded linen. It was during one of those late evenings, when the sky had already turned blue-black and the town had fallen into its slow rhythm of night, that Naomi sat outside their rented room, shelling a gussie by lantern light. Timmy was inside, tracing letters in his homework notebook, his soft voice repeating spellings to himself. The breeze carried the smell of fried akra from a neighbor's pan, mixed with the distant hiss of lanterns and the hum of crickets. Naomi looked up at the stars, the same ones she had once whispered prayers to in Valandria, asking them to carry her voice across the ocean to her son. Those stars had heard her cries then, and now they stood witness to her peace. Her fingers moved rhythmically, seeds piling in the metal bowl with the soft clink of patience. She thought of all she had endured, of Ruth's eyes avoiding hers, of Mama Rachel's silence, of Michael's guilt worn like an old jacket. Their apologies had come too late, like a bucket of water thrown after fire had already devoured the house. Naomi had never replied to Ruth's letters. She had read them, yes, each one full of words that tried to bandage what was too far gone. But she had folded them neatly and kept them away, not from bitterness, but from understanding. Some wounds were meant to heal without reopening. And even though her anger had cooled, trust, once broken, didn't return like a runaway goat. It had to be raised again from the roots. She had chosen to plant her roots elsewhere. When school vacation came, Timmy brought home a certificate, first in his class. His excitement was loud, filling the small room with laughter and hurried speech. Naomi sat him down, cradling his face with both hands, her voice thick with pride. "You see why I always say you are enough?" she told him, and the boy giggled, pointing to his name written in bold letters. That night, she allowed them both a small treat. She bought bread and beans from Madame Fola's cousin's kiosk and borrowed an old radio to play music while they ate. They danced too, awkwardly at first, then freely, Naomi twirling him around in the dim light until they collapsed on the raffia mat in fits of laughter. For a moment, she forgot every hardship, every betrayal, every footstep she had taken back from the brink. In that little room, with cracked walls and a leaking corner, they had built something whole from the pieces left behind. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't glamour. But it was happiness sown from honesty, laughter stitched with love. Naomi no longer feared tomorrow the way she used to. She had no illusions about life being easy, but she had learned that even broken ground could grow something beautiful if watered with enough care. And her son, who had once walked barefoot with dust on his feet, now ran free with clean shoes and clearer eyes. One morning, months after Timmy had returned to school for a new term, Naomi received an envelope addressed in familiar handwriting. She turned it over in her hands for several minutes before opening it. Inside was a simple note from Mama Rachel, not long, just a few lines written in shaky script. "I know you may never forgive me, Naomi, but I want you to know I regret it every day. If you ever pass by Olode again, come and let me see you and the boy. My heart is tired." Naomi folded the letter without a word and placed it inside her Bible. She didn't respond. She didn't plan to. Forgiveness wasn't always about returning. Sometimes it was about letting go in silence. As she rose to begin her day, she peeked through the curtain and saw Timmy adjusting his socks, ready for school, his bag slung neatly over his back. He turned to see her and smiled, a real smile, one that lit up his whole face. Naomi's heart filled slowly, like a bowl under a gentle tap. She stepped outside with him and locked the door, the sun already warming the path ahead. They walked together down the road, side by side, her hand resting gently on his back. The past was a story behind them, no longer needing retelling. What lay ahead was simple and true, a woman who came back, and a boy who was never lost, just waiting to be found again. Sometimes, the people you trust with your heart may not handle it with care. Don't let that make you bitter, let it make you wiser. Always listen to your instincts, even when the world tells you to be quiet. Your silence should never cost you your peace, and your love should never be mistaken for weakness. Protect what matters to you, and when life breaks you, don't be afraid to start again, this time on your own terms. May your hands never labor in vain. May your sacrifices return to you pressed down, shaken together, and running over. May those who secretly wished for your downfall be shocked by your rising. May your children never suffer where you are working hard to give them joy. May God turn your secret tears into open testimonies. May betrayal never break your spirit, and may peace return to your home like morning light. For every no you've ever heard, may heaven answer you with a thunderous yes. If this touched your heart, say a big amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Turn on post notifications. See you on our next story.